Hi, John Feldt here. Welcome to the Weekly Water Outlook. You know, as we've gone through the winter so far, it's always interesting to see where the snow tracks will develop. So far, we've had three very predominant tracks. One has been from the upper Midwest, from North Dakota down towards Wisconsin. The second track has originated in Texas, the northwest part of Texas, headed up towards the northeast across parts of Oklahoma, Kansas, Missouri, and Iowa. And the third track, which was in the news a lot lately, has been the northeast U.S. Now, it looks like we've been alternating back and forth from these tracks. Last week it was definitely the Northeast U.S. and the Great Lakes track. This week it looks like it could be more the Kansas up towards Iowa track. It'll be interesting to see how that develops for the next couple weeks and month as we get through the rest of winter. Now, over the Southeast U.S. there will be some heavy rain in spots. Some areas will really need that for continued drought relief. Other areas it could produce some scattered flooding. I'm going to be talking about these weather patterns and more on this week's edition of the Weekly Water Outlook. Let's start off today's briefing by looking at where the precipitation fell over the last week. First of all, over the Ohio Valley and Gray, that's missing data. But around the rest of the nation, really, it was less active, definitely from a rainfall perspective this week than last week. However, the story was really snow this week. All the precipitation in Iowa, over Minnesota, Wisconsin, parts of Illinois, that area in green, that's a liquid equivalent of 0.50 to 2.0, and that came in the form of snow. So definitely heavy snow in this region right here. You all probably heard about the snow along the coast, snow over parts of the mid-Atlantic up towards the northeast U.S., and some heavy rain over the western part of the U.S., over northern California, parts of southwest Oregon as well. But definitely, I think snow was the story this week. So we look at the percent of normal precipitation. What we see here is above normal precipitation from the upper tier of the U.S., North Dakota, down through Minnesota and Iowa into the Great Lakes region, primarily Wisconsin. Side note here, this has been one of the tracks this year of the more enhanced precipitation. If I had to draw some of the more interesting tracks so far this year, I see about three of them. This is the first one. It's been a heavy snow track. I'll be talking about that in just a minute. We had another one from the Texas Panhandle up towards Missouri into Iowa, parts of Illinois, and a third one across the southeast U.S., and that's really been the hot spot. There's also been some action over the northeast U.S. as well. Speaking of snow, here's the last 7-day snow, and this is one of the more widespread weeks of snow so far this winter, the week of the 3rd through the 9th. The area in green is at least 6 inches of snow, and the dark green is 9 to 12 inches of snow. And the smaller areas of blue are over a foot of snow. So you can see pockets of very heavy snow over parts of, small part of Minnesota, small part of Indiana, and then larger parts of Virginia, and then parts of the northeast U.S. So more extensive heavy snow, most likely here in parts of the mid-Atlantic states, part of the northeast U.S. as well. So like I said, last week was definitely an increase in snow, and it's very important this time of year when we get heavy snow because it doesn't stay on the ground all that long before we get into the spring snowmelt. So the snow depth on the ground right now, I've been saying this for much of the winter, it's not so much that the extent of snow is extensive, because look at parts of South Dakota, Nebraska, Kansas, and Missouri, not a whole lot of snow cover. It's been confined to pretty much North Dakota and Minnesota, Wisconsin, parts of Michigan. So it really has been, for many weeks now, this southern extent of snow has been held in check. That'll probably be help as far as spring snowmelt flooding. Even though it's high amounts of snow north of that line, the overall aerial extent is somewhat limited. But it is beginning to build up over those areas where there is snow cover. If we look at the water equivalent now, we're getting that maroon, and that is close to 4 inches of water equivalent, between 2 and 4 inches, and it's getting pretty significant now, especially over parts of Minnesota and North Dakota. So that's the area right now I think it need to keep an eye on. Also, more typical over Maine and the far northeast U.S., heavy snow, but climatologically speaking, that's probably not unusual for that region. Over the central part of the state that often can get quite a bit of snow, including parts of Iowa, Kansas, and Nebraska, not all that much right now with not as much water equivalent. So in that area might not be so bad as far as potential for spring snowmelt flooding. Drought monitor shows pretty much not a whole lot of change as we get into early March. The snow has eroded a bit of the drought, at least alleviated parts of it over eastern Nebraska into parts of eastern Iowa. And we've had the trend, of course, over the southeast U.S. over the last 30 days. Very significant drought relief where we had extreme or an exceptional drought, the areas of red. Right now it's just D0 and a small area of D1 or even D2, very small in that region. But still, you can see a large part of the middle part of the nation still is covered in drought, and even though there's been some improvement so far this winter, large parts of Nebraska, Kansas, and Oklahoma, as well as Colorado, and patchy areas of Texas are still in D3 or D4 drought. Now, due to the snow or rain, there is some flooding occurring. This gives you some idea over the Midwest and lingering areas of the southeast U.S. Yellow are generally just strong within bank rises. The orange is minor flooding. I think when I point out flooding, I think to bring to your attention really the red areas are the moderate flooding, and that's where more significant problems. So Missouri, small area of Iowa, along the Illinois border, and then over the southeast U.S., just isolated spots. So right now, for this time of year, when we start to get more into the flood season, I wouldn't call this all that unusual, and it very well could increase if we get heavy rain over the next couple weeks. Okay, here's the Arctic Oscillation update. I've been talking a lot about this, and probably as we get into spring, I won't talk as much about this, and not nearly, if at all, as we get into late spring and definitely in summer. But I did want to point out the winter has been really dominated by this negative AO. The blue boxes are negative phase of the AO, and just a very small area here that was positive. But by far, 90% of the winter so far has been this negative phase, and the red are ensembles for the rest of the month of what it's going to do, and it looks like it's going to stay predominantly negative as we get out through the rest of March. Now, why is this important? I'm going to talk about that in just a bit, but what it does is it tightens up thermal gradients, and when these thermal gradients tighten up, it gives us a clue on where the heavy rain will occur. So the big picture this week, the jet stream, and I focus on the big picture, the jet stream, because I'm looking at overall precipitation trends and patterns. Early in the week is the blue jet stream, and this is your classic negative phase Arctic oscillation jet stream, a digging of the trough, cold air sagging into the central and eastern part of the U.S., and then pulses of energy rotating through. And what that's going to bring, parts of the nation, primarily the Midwest, the parts of the southeast U.S., and then into the mid-Atlantic and northeast U.S., is sort of a one-shot chance of rain. So there will be some significant rain, a chance of snow in the colder air, but it looks like it's going to be a one-shot system as this passes through. By late in the week, the yellow line, the center of that trough, extends now a bit to the east. It pushes up in the west. Now, anywhere under this bulging of the jet stream, it's going to be fairly quiet. So if you look at this both in the early week and the late week, much of this area here is under that pattern, and that would be expected to be fairly quiet weather. Now, during the winter months, I often look at the track of surface lows, and I wanted to point out that this week there is a forecast of a surface low moving from Kansas up into the Great Lakes, and there is a possibility of heavy rain to the north of that low. I've shaded that in blue. That would be the action spot in the cold air for the snow. Now, you might remember in these briefings for the last month or so, I say once these snow tracks set up in wintertime, many times the areas of low will repeatedly go over the same areas. We've seen this now for a number of months with some slight alterations from Texas, northwest Texas, up through parts of Kansas, Missouri, Illinois, up towards either Wisconsin or Minnesota, and then the heavy snow is generally along and north of that track. That's been one of these predominant snow tracks, and this is where the possibility of heavy snow will be this week as well. And this model up here, up on the top left, that shows the possibility of the heaviest snow this week in Iowa. Could be very heavy in that region as we go through the week. Now, I mentioned those thermal gradients, and this is a temperature forecast for later this week. The maroon are the coldest temperatures, red the warmest. And when you get these patterns that are very tightly packed together here, it goes from very cold to very warm. They often set up over parts of the southeast U.S. into the middle Atlantic, and that is where oftentimes your most active precipitation patterns will set up. That's what we've seen over the last 30 to 60 days. We've seen some improvement in drought conditions due to that alignment. So when we have this negative phased Arctic oscillation, even though some areas are very quiet, such as the West, other areas can get more active weather, and that's been the case over parts of the eastern U.S. Now, I mentioned this week it looks like a sort of a one-shot precipitation pattern. The forecast here for rainfall shows the possibility of some 1 to 2 inch rains over part of the southeast U.S. The rain or the precipitation over Iowa up to the northeast or into the Great Lakes states, that's over an inch. That could be very heavy snow, so that's going to be interesting to see how that alters the snow landscape in those areas. And then in the Pacific Northwest, look at how heavy the rain is expected to be over a small part of the Pacific Northwest. That's that entry region for the jet that I just showed you, and that entry region pushes into that area. However, just as importantly, because when I talk about precipitation, I not only talk about excess rain, but I talk lack of rain. A large part of the western U.S. and southwest U.S., from California all the way to Texas, no rain forecast at all through the entire week. So the takeaway points from this week's briefing: looks like a significant heavy snow over parts of the Midwest up into the Great Lakes area, especially Iowa, Wisconsin. Over the southeast U.S., from Mississippi, Alabama, and Tennessee, parts of Georgia, one-shot chance of rain early this week with some heavy amounts expected. Very wet over the Pacific Northwest and continue dry from the west to the southwest U.S. Thank you for listening to this week's briefing. I will be updating this again next Sunday.